Welcome in everybody to week 6 Dynasty lessons learned. So we're entering week 7. We just finished week 6. So once again, game by game, team by team, essentially, I have more or less one takeaway from every single team, every single game, with again being a little bit uh, judicious about which teams I actually want to talk about in depth, because some of these teams are just, we already know who they are, but you guys know the deal. Let's get right into it. First things first, Thursday night game, Niners versus the Seahawks. This is the first game where I just didn't really kind of like learn anything from this game. These are two very good teams. There's a lot of fantasy points to be had on both sides, but it just, they kind of are what they are right now. The Niners, of course, with, Debo Samuel, George Kittle do well. Brandon Ayuk did not do well this week, but did well, back in week 5. So just weighing out those three basically every single week. I didn't really learn anything new. It's just, you just have to roll with it on week by week basis in terms of whose game it actually is. Same thing goes for the Seahawks between Metcalf and Lockett and JSN. Whose week is it? They all kind of can do the same thing. DK Metcalf did miss 2 different touchdowns. One that was a toe tap touchdown, like an Isaiah Likely touchdown, that did not stand because he stood out of bounds just by like a toenail. And then the 50-yard touchdown got called back on a illegal shift penalty or something like that. So DK Metcalf did miss out on 2 touchdowns. Jordan Mason, of course, got injured. He did practice on Monday, so I'm seeing that maybe he could play this week. So that just kind of is what it is. But essentially, didn't really learn anything. There's just a bunch of fantasy assets on a week by week basis. You just got to play the game of whose week is it ultimately. But I would be holding all these guys if you had them. I'm continuing to buy DK Metcalf, continuing to buy Brandon Ayuk. If you can sell Jordan Mason, then that's fine, just because of his injury, plus with CMC potentially coming back. But I don't really know what you can even sell him for at this point, especially if he doesn't end up playing, which was basically his entire value was predicated on him playing without CMC. So don't really know what to do there. But that was a Thursday night game. Sunday morning, the London game here, the Jaguars and the Bears. On the Jaguars side of the ball, Evan Ingram, man, 20 fantasy points, 10 receptions for 102 yards, 10 targets, 28% target share. Welcome back, Evan Ingram, in his first game played for the 2024 season. It is really fun to add another tight end to fantasy football that we can feel confident about starting every single week. David Njoku also come back and is looking pretty good too. So the more tight ends that we have for fantasy football, I think the better. So that's a good thing that Evan Ingram came in and just immediately reestablished himself as a top 10 fantasy tight end with top 5, top 3 weekly upside, like he just had here with 10 total targets. I don't know if that's like prescriptive to what's going to happen every single week. I don't want to call Evan Ingram the top target on the Jaguars every week, because I think Christian Kirk is still there. BTJ obviously is coming out and is really strong. But Evan Ingram, weekly top 10 fantasy tight end. Just love to see it. I'm not actively buying him just because I think it's hard to buy tight ends in general. I'm interested in, if you buy Evan Ingram, I'm not opposed to buying him. I'm just not actively like, oh, he's a trade target because of what he did on Sunday. That's not where I'm at with Evan Ingram. But I am trying to buy BTJ if anybody's panicking. I've already seen some wild tweets saying that, Evan Ingram came in and just immediately demolished BTJ. So that's not good for BTJ. Bears defense is really, really good. They've been shutting down wide receivers all year. I am not concerned whatsoever about Brian Thomas Jr. And had he caught the touchdown instead of dropping it, we would not be having this discussion. He would have had another double-digit point week, and he would have been totally fine. So because he didn't catch the touchdown, because Evan Ingram had 10 targets, all of a sudden people are worried about BTJ. If that's the case, buy. And as for the Bears side of it, DeAndre Swift, another 20-point performance, 17 carries, 91 yards, and a touchdown, another 4 for 28 through the air. He still is a great RB2. I talked about him once again on the 4 for 4 channel as a redraft buy for the next month. They are on a bye week this week, but he just continues to demolish really bad run defenses. And for the next 4 weeks after their bye week this week, they continue to play subpar to really bad defenses. Now, their playoff schedule for the fantasy playoffs, it's really, really bad for DeAndre Swift. He has some really tough matchups in there. So I've been saying on 4 for 4 from a redraft standpoint, if you can buy Swift now to help you buy some wins over the next few weeks to actually make the playoffs, DeAndre Swift then is a sell prior to any trade deadlines and redraft, and prior to any trade deadlines that you have in Dynasty or in and around the Thanksgiving timeframe. But for the next 4 weeks, I think DeAndre Swift is still a really good buy just because he continues to be a guy that's just beating up on these bad defenses. And that is basically their schedule for the next month after their bye week. So if you can pull him away, especially from somebody that's looking for points of this week, not to say that anybody's really doing that from a dynasty standpoint, but if you can pull him away during the bye week this week for the next 4 weeks after that, I think DeAndre Swift is still a really good buy. Anything less than a first, I would be in on. Texans and Patriots. This game was really fun. From the Texans side of the ball, I just learned that this is what the offense looks like without Nico Collins. Joe Mixon came back in his first game back, looked phenomenal. Basically, he's had 2 strong games in the 2 games that he was fully healthy for in week 1 against the Colts, and now this past week in week 6 against the Patriots. Joe Mixon, fantastic buy for any contenders out there. Diggs did well. He performed and had a touchdown. Tank Dell performed, had a touchdown without Nico Collins, as I had hoped and expected. So both those guys are going to be great without Nico Collins. Dalton Schultz did have 8 targets. He didn't really do anything on the 8 targets, but it's encouraging to see that he got 8 targets. So any tight end that is getting that kind of target volume needs to be on our radar. And Schultz could offer, tight end 1 fantasy upside with Nico Collins out. So this entire offense is fantastic. Just continue to buy all of these guys. Buy Mixon if you're a contender. Buy Diggs if you're a contender. Buy Tank Dell if you're anybody. And continue to buy Nico Collins too. Don't forget about trying to buy him low if contenders are panicking about not having fantasy points from him still for a minimum of 3 games out on injured reserve. So continue to buy low on Nico Collins and the rest of this offense. For the Patriots, Drake Maye, man, welcome to the NFL. 243 passing yards, 3 passing touchdowns, also had 5 carries for 38 rushing yards. So love to see that rushing floor. Again, it was something that we saw at North Carolina in college. So it's nice to see him in his first start in the NFL, showing that rushing upside as well. And he did it against a very good Texans defense with subpar weapons, of course. Demario Douglas looks like he could be, a really like a Kendrick Bourne 2.0 for this Patriots offense. Another guy that maybe like a Wan'Dale Robinson, like a Jacoby Myers kind of player that could come out over the next second half of the season and have that connection with Drake Maye and be a really good fantasy producer too. Kayshon Boutte actually looked like not Booty. And hopefully Jalen Polk just continues to build on the opportunity that he's been given right now and establish a connection with Drake Maye and produce over the second half of the season. But in terms of Drake Maye, I mean, I think he's a trade target for everybody right now. I think whether you're contending, whether you're rebuilding, he is a high upside QB3 priced quarterback right now that has long-term QB1 upside. He might honestly probably be more priced as a QB2, but if you can buy him as that QB3, find ways to, pivot off of Deshaun Watson over to Drake Maye. Obviously, you're going to have to add something to Watson, but, how can you move from Watson to Drake Maye, Levis to Drake Maye, Stafford to Drake Maye, Derek Carr to Drake Maye? How can you make those moves? What do you have to add to those guys to move over to him? If it's worth it, I think it's very much worth it to buy Drake Maye right now for the long-term upside that he possesses, especially once he gets more weapons. If he's already doing this with subpar weapons, imagine if he actually gets somebody to come in and actually be a wide receiver 1 for the team, like a T. Higgins, like a Michael Pittman, or something along those lines. Commanders versus Ravens, another high-powered game. Lots of fantasy players on both sides, but I just, again, didn't learn anything because these offenses just are what they are. The Baltimore Ravens, Derrick Henry is just a beast. He's phenomenal. He's a contending level running back, RB1. He's fantastic. Zay Flowers continues to do well in high-scoring games. Terry McLaurin is still producing. I'm still interested in upgrading off of Terry McLaurin. I talked about that last week. He produced again. I'm not like actively trying to move Terry McLaurin, especially if you are competing. I am, very fine with keeping him for the fantasy production, but it's just, does he give you a easy way to upgrade to a wide receiver that you previously weren't able to upgrade with Terry McLaurin before, the season started? So if Terry McLaurin's value has risen, how can you upgrade off of that to a player that you previously weren't able to get with him? That's my whole thing with Terry McLaurin. I'm not like actively like he's a massive sell. It's just, could he be a nice upgrade piece right now for dynasty purposes and longevity while also maintaining production. And we got a Mark Andrews sighting. That's good to see. I think he was like 3 for 44 and a touchdown. So he had a one big catch. He had that red zone touchdown as well. So hopefully Mark Andrews is returning to form here off of the injury and after the car accident and everything like that. So hopefully Mark Andrews just continues to do well over the second half of the season. No Brian Robinson this week. Austin Eckler looked fine. But both these teams just are what they are right now, and you already know who you're playing. Browns and Eagles game now. For the Browns, once again, please play Jameis Winston. That's all I'm going to say about this one. Of course, we're going to talk about Amari Cooper later in this video, but from the Browns side of it, the only two guys that I'm really interested in from the Amari Cooper trade is David Njoku. I think is the main beneficiary of Amari Cooper being traded. And I'm more interested in Elijah Moore now, especially Elijah Moore with Jameis Winston. I feel like we've just kind of forgotten the fact that he exists because Jerry Jeudy has been kind of doing well-ish, and Amari Cooper obviously was their wide receiver one. So I love buying David Njoku. I love trying to see if you can buy low on Elijah Moore, not to like actively go out and buy him straight up, but like how can you include him into a deal that you were already trying to make or get him thrown into any sort of deal right now, just as a stash, just to see with Jameis Winston. I would like to sell Jerry Jeudy off of this. I'm not really interested. He didn't do anything in Denver. Not really interested in him with Deshaun Watson. And obviously he might be better with Jameis Winston. This whole offense would from a fantasy standpoint, but I just don't really care about Jerry Jeudy. So I'd be looking to sell him off of the news of Amari Cooper. As for the Eagles side of it, A.J. Brown, man, 6 receptions, 116 yards, and a touchdown on 9 targets, 36% target share, 23 PPR fantasy points. Basically, in his 2 games played, he's played in week 1 and in week 6, he's produced basically 23 fantasy points. I think he was at like 22.8, 22.9 in week 1, 23.6 in week 6. So he is the PPR wide receiver 1 in points per game. With around those 23 fantasy points per game. He looks healthy. He is a stud. He's an alpha. He's so freaking good. He is this engine for the Eagles offense, and he's the safety blanket for Jalen Hurts. So I am always looking to buy A.J. Brown, but if you could buy him, especially as a contender, he might legitimately win people leagues because his fantasy schedule for the remainder of the year is just so freaking good. They still have to play the Commanders twice. They have to play the Giants. They still have to play the Cowboys again. So there's just so many good matchups for A.J. Brown moving forward that if you are a contender and you have a guy like Marvin Harrison Jr., you have a guy like Puka Nacua, even if you could upgrade off of Rashee Rice that you just lost, or if you can upgrade from Drake London or Garrett Wilson or sell high on any of these other up-and-coming kind of players like Jaden Reed or BTJ. Not to say that I want to sell those guys just to sell them, but if you can upgrade off of them to A.J. Brown, he is just so freaking good that I just want A.J. Brown, and I would love to see how I can upgrade to him as a contending roster. He's so good, dude. Now, as for the Cardinals-Packers game, this Cardinals offense, dude, I have no idea what the heck is going on. It has been nothing like what I thought it was going to be. Nothing's really clicking outside of mostly James Conner. Trey McBride has been doing well for the majority of the year, did well this past week in week 6. But overall, Kyler has been a disappointment, at least in terms of where I thought he would be. From a fantasy standpoint, I still think he's a top 10 quarterback. He's QB9 in points per game, and he's QB12 in or QB9 in total points, QB12 in points per game. So he's still a fantasy QB1. But it still just feels like a disappointment because he's not doing all that much. It's really just 2 games that he had. He had a 28-pointer in week 2, 25-pointer in week 5. But then the other 4 weeks, he's been at or below 15 fantasy points. So that's where the disappointment has been coming from. Marvin Harrison Jr. is now hurt, basically had like 1 or 2 good games himself. Greg Dortch has disappeared. Michael Wilson is just kind of there. This offense just is super disappointing. I don't really want to do anything with it. I don't want to sell Kyler Murray right now. I don't want to sell Marvin Harrison Jr. unless you're pivoting to somebody else like an A.J. Brown or a Malik Neighbors or a CeeDee Lamb or somebody. That's the only really way I want to sell Marvin Harrison. But I think you just got to ride this one out. It's been a tough go of things, and maybe it's still just getting used to this new offense with Kyler Murray still getting healthy. Jonathan Gannon, I have no idea what's going on, but hopefully there are greener pastures ahead for the Arizona Cardinals. Now, speaking of greener pastures. Jordan Love, dude, holy crap. 258 yards and 4 touchdowns, also had 13 rushing yards, 26 and a half fantasy points. October ADP just dropped. He's the QB4 in October DLF ADP, which I think, honestly, he is more than deserving of that. He is absolutely fantastic. I am definitely paying the price for not really believing in him and not really investing in him back before last season, whenever Aaron Rodgers did go to the Jets. But this is exactly the reason why you roll the dice on these high upside but high risk quarterbacks, especially when they're valued as QB3s. That's why you go after guys like Will Levis, guys like Bo Nix, guys like Drake Maye, all of these other, QB3s that if they hit and they hit like Jordan Love, you have a perennial top 10, top 5 dynasty quarterback in guys like this, in Jordan Love. So, I mean, he's more valuable, I think, than Joe Burrow, more valuable than Kyler Murray, more valuable than Patrick Mahomes. He is up there with the CJ Strouds and the Lamar Jacksons and the Jaden Daniels and Jalen Hurts. Like, that's where he belongs in Dynasty. He is so very good. I have the advice to buy him, but I don't even know if you can right now, just because whoever has him, I think, knows what they have in Jordan Love, especially if they stuck around with him and had him even since the rookie draft, but at least since last year when he actually got the starting job whenever Aaron Rodgers left. But man, Jordan Love, really, really good. And he's bringing all the other receivers with him too. He's bringing all that offense up for fantasy football, which you love to see. Jordan Love is fantastic. I clicked off of there we go. Buccaneers and Saints now. Not really a whole lot to talk about from this game. It was actually a really weird game, but it was fun to still watch. Baker Mayfield looks like a top 15 dynasty quarterback. I think he's gotten up to where Dak Prescott kind of is, where Trevor Lawrence, where we wanted him to be, maybe where he was prior to the season, where Tua kind of was during last year, leading up to this year before he got hurt, obviously, where Kirk Cousins and Jared Goff kind of were. Like, Baker is up ahead of that, or in that range of everything, as a top 15 dynasty quarterback, maybe even top 12, with how some of the other quarterbacks really aren't producing all that well. And he continues to produce. He's in a great offensive system, obviously has 2 fantastic wide receivers. He's running too, which is also really fun to see. So Baker's stock has definitely risen a ton this year. Godwin is a top 20 dynasty wide receiver. He's fantastic. He's the wide receiver 1 in points per game right now. Mike Evans is a great win now asset, of course. Bucky Irving is showing out. Sean Tucker, everybody who's watched the DLF channel has watched me and Justin over the past year since Sean Tucker was a rookie, knows how much we love Sean Tucker. You'd love to see that, baby. It's just, I hope that that's a thing moving forward. I hope that the team looks at Rachaad White and says, you're not doing it anymore. We're passing the torch over to Bucky Irving and Sean Tucker. I wouldn't be surprised if this was Sean Tucker's most relevant game for fantasy football this year, and that he's kind of become a fool's gold waiver pickup. If you're thinking that he's going to have kind of like long-term upside, of course, if Bucky Irving were to get hurt, Rachaad White continues to be hurt, then Sean Tucker would be phenomenal. But if Rachaad White comes back and he's healthy for the remainder of the year, Bucky Irving is healthy for the remainder of the year, I think Sean Tucker is just going to take a back seat for 2024. But he still remains a fantastic stash moving forward, a la Jerome Ford, essentially. Like, Sean Tucker was definitely worth the waiver wire pickup, but I just don't know if you picked him up thinking that you're going to get an RB2 moving forward. I don't know if he's necessarily that. Not to say that anybody out was thinking that, but I've seen people ask if Sean Tucker's legit for 2024, and I don't think the path is there yet when Rachaad White comes back. But love this offense in general. Now, as for the New Orleans Saints offense, obviously Derek Carr's hurt. Chris Olave got hurt. He left with a concussion. Rashid Shaheed picked up a knee injury that they're calling kind of serious now. So that was a surprise. So all of a sudden, Bub Means is the wide receiver 1 for New Orleans, especially with that connection that he has with Spencer Rattler. I don't really know. I mean, the only guy I think that you have confidence in starting from this offense is Alvin Kamara, especially with Olave and Shaheed out. So it's just Alvin Kamara right now. Kendrick Miller's coming back from the injured reserve, so that's at least interesting. But I don't really know if there's anything to talk about from the New Orleans Saints side other than Bub means business, right? Colts and Titans game. Colts side of it, Josh Downs, 19.5 PPR points, 7 for 66 and 1 on 9 targets, 24% target share. He is a really, really good wide receiver. I honestly think that he is low-key making Michael Pittman expendable. Not from the sense that I think that Josh Downs is more talented than Michael Pittman, but Downs is very clearly becoming like the 1A in this offense. And especially as he has the favor of Joe Flacco. He can still, I think, produce with Anthony Richardson. I'm scared that Anthony Richardson's going to ruin everything with this all this fancy production that we had under Joe Flacco. But Josh Downs is actually just a really, really good wide receiver. I mean, we saw it in North Carolina. We saw it in flashes last year too, in and around his injuries. But he is so good. And I'm putting out in the world that it's possible that Michael Pittman does get traded. I haven't really seen any like hardcore rumors about it or anything like that. But like, I would not be surprised if Michael Pittman ended up being moved at some point this year to New Orleans, to not New Orleans, to New England, to Kansas City, to any of these other teams that could kind of need maybe Pittsburgh. I don't know. Washington. Like I could see Michael Pittman getting traded. And if that happens, Josh Downs would be a huge winner. Especially if he still has a connection with Anthony Richardson. So we'll just have to see. But I like buying Josh Downs just because I think that he is talented. I will buy talent over situation all day. And Josh Downs is talented. Now, Titans side of the ball, Tony Pollard once again is just looking like an absolute workhorse, a bell cow, honestly. 17 carries for 93 yards and a touchdown. Did also have 3 receptions, but for -5 yards. But 3 receptions is great to see. Tyjae Spears is injured. I would not be surprised if he gets put on IR. I said the same thing about Nico Collins last week. Then he got put on IR. So I would not be surprised if Spears went on IR with a hamstring injury. He's not practicing this week. He's not going to play this week. So it remains to be seen. But as long as Tyjae Spears is out, Tony Pollard already had a tremendous amount of this backfield and was a workhorse. But in the weeks that Tyjae Spears is out, he's that and more. I mean, he's seen 16 plus carries in 4 out of 5 games. Basically, every game that wasn't that Packers game, if we just remove that game entirely from the equation, the other 4 games that Tony Pollard has played, he has seen 16 or more carries. He's seen basically anywhere from 3 to 5 receptions per game, 20 touches basically every game. He is a workhorse bell cow and is a great player to go out and buy because I still don't think he's going to cost you anything really more than a second-round pick. Maybe it's a second and a third. Maybe it's a second and I don't know, some other random running back that's in the, I don't know, like a Sean Tucker and a second for Tony Pollard. Sure, that gets it done. As a contender, I think you should be willing to go out and buy Tony Pollard because his rest of season schedule, there's some bumps in the road, but it's mostly pretty solid as well. So go buy Tony Pollard as a contender. Speaking of running backs to go out and buy as a contender, J.K. Dobbins, man, I'm ready to get hurt again by J.K. Dobbins. I'm on the train. I've seen enough. 25 for 96 and 1 this past week, and also 2 receptions, 18 fantasy points. He's had 17 plus touches in each of the last 4 weeks around their bye week. Season high 27 touches in week 6. This team wants to run. That was very obvious. We knew that from the very minute that they, basically signed Harbaugh and Roman that they wanted to run. But J.K. Dobbins is their guy, especially with Gus Edwards out. This is J.K. Dobbins' backfield. Kamani Vidal looked interesting, but outside of that, 40-yard touchdown that he had, he basically didn't do anything else. He had 3 or 4 touches outside of that touchdown. So Vidal is fun. He's interesting with Gus Edwards on IR, but this is J.K. Dobbins' backfield. As long as he stays healthy, he should be really, really good moving forward. I think he's a top 15 fantasy running back right now in total points, top 12 or 13 in points per game. Another player that I think would not cost you anything really more than a second to go out and get as a contender in J.K. Dobbins. On the Broncos side of the ball, I don't really know what else to say. I mean, this team just isn't that good. We can't rely on a rookie quarterback to consistently deliver for fantasy for him, for Bo Nix's sake, but also for everybody else. Courtland Sutton is just kind of fine. He's like the main target for Bo Nix, and he's finding the end zone every now and again, so he's pretty fine. Javonte was bad again. We had a Troy Franklin sighting, so that was pretty good. But just overall, this offense is just not really that good, and there's really not much to talk about because you're not starting a whole lot of players from this team. Honestly, I'd like to not even start Courtland Sutton, but he's fine if you really need him to. But don't forget about Audric Estime. He did get activated, did get a little bit of playing time this past week, but I wouldn't be surprised as the season goes on if Sean Payton tries to give him more of the workload to see what they have in him, especially if they're not sticking with Javonte after this year. Steelers and Raiders game. From the Steelers side of it, we are hopefully getting Russell Wilson. I am so done of Justin Fields. I don't understand all these other people that are so mad that Mike Tomlin might be moving on from Justin Fields, blah, 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 blah. I don't care. Russell Wilson is better, and he's going to be better for fantasy football as well. I'm so excited as a Steelers fan that we get Russell Wilson. I might be in like the 1% minority of people that are excited for Russell Wilson over Justin Fields. I don't care. I'm sticking with it. He's going to be good for George Pickens. He's going to be good for Pat Freiermuth. He might even be good for Van Jefferson or Calvin Austin after the fact. And Najee Harris is definitely a sell after this past week. If you can sell high on this Raiders game that he had, please do. But for everybody else, I think George Pickens is a buy. Pat Freiermuth is interesting as a hold. But I'm excited for Russell Wilson to just be done with Justin Fields. Then as a Raiders side of it, there really isn't anything to talk about just because outside of Brock Bowers, nothing really happened. Of course, Davante Adams did finally get traded. We'll talk about that later in this video, as I alluded to with Amari Cooper. But this is like the same kind of blurb that I had last week, just because it's the same thing. Brock Bowers is fantastic. You're probably not going to be able to buy Brock Bowers because it's Dynasty, but Jacoby Myers didn't play. But when he comes back, he's going to be a top target. These two guys are the guys. They're the winners from Davante Adams actually being traded. So more of the same. We already knew Davante Adams was going to be traded. I talked about this same thing last week. Now that he is traded, Brock Bowers at 16 fantasy points on 10 targets. Myers, when he comes back, is going to be great. That's the story there. Lions and Cowboys game. From the Lions side of the ball, David Montgomery, man, 12 carries for 80 yards. And that should actually, he scored twice in this game. So that should say 2 touchdowns. I put 1. 12 carries for 80 yards and 2 touchdowns. Also had 1 reception, didn't do anything with it, but you're not worried about receiving yards for David Montgomery. He is the most underrated running back in Dynasty football, hands down, the most underrated running back. Every single person out there who is a contender should be actively looking to buy David Montgomery, especially with his contract extension now that gives him more longevity. I'm willing to pay more than a first for David Montgomery, a first and a second, a first and some other running back that's not like I would pay Najee Harris and a first round pick for David Montgomery as a contender. That I think is so easy to me because he is a top 10 fantasy tight end, fantasy running back right now. And I don't know any reason why that should stop whatsoever. He's in one of the best offenses in the league, one of the most run heavy offenses in the league. He is a red zone threat. He is probably the best handcuff running back in the league as well, for that when games, if Jahmyr Gibbs were to miss any games in those games and David Montgomery gets the whole pie of this backfield, that is like his ceiling is just through the roof in those situations as well. So I am continuing to buy David Montgomery, and you should be actively looking to buy him for a first or more if you are a contender. There's still a possibility that you can get him for less than a first. There are a handful of examples of those trades in the DLF Trade Finder, but if you have to pay a first round pick, do not feel like that is overpaying for David Montgomery, because I don't think it is. So please go buy David Montgomery. Now, on the Cowboys side of it, I think I kind of have to talk about CeeDee Lamb. He had 7 receptions for 89 yards, had a 32% target share with 14 targets. But this whole game for Dak Prescott and the Cowboys was just really rough. Again, this Cowboys team is so one-dimensional. They don't really have a run game, so teams are just eliminating the pass, and it's not that hard to beat the Dallas Cowboys. Overall, CeeDee Lamb has been kind of a disappointment for fantasy football. I mean, he's the wide receiver 17 in fantasy points per game. That's not bad, but it's not, CeeDee Lamb. It's not wide receiver 1 overall ceiling, top 3, top 5 consistent scorer. But I mean, he's getting so much volume. He had 14 targets this past week. He's on pace for 160 or more targets on the year. He's the wide receiver 1. He's the alpha. He's still great. Talent is still there. It's just that right now things are not really clicking for the Dallas Cowboys because their offense is so one-dimensional. But I would still love to be looking to buy CeeDee Lamb if you can. I would love to see if you can upgrade easily to him, more easily than you would have been able to 2 months ago. How can you upgrade from Marvin Harrison Jr., from Puka, from Rashee Rice? even side grade from you. Can you trade Chase or Amon-Ra for CeeDee Lamb plus something really good, plus this extra second round pick, plus an extra depth piece? How can you do those trades with CeeDee Lamb? That's what I would be actively trying to do right now if I did not have him, trying to see if you could pay. Basically, I'm not going to say you're getting a discount, but like 99% on the dollar, 99 cents on the dollar, 99% um, off of CeeDee Lamb's actual price. Because I think the discount for him right now is that he might actually be acquirable, not that you have any sort of actual trade discount. But go buy CeeDee Lamb. I talked way too long about all that stuff. Falcons and Panthers now. On the Falcons side of the ball, Bijan Robinson, welcome back. Bijan Robinson, 15 carries for 95 yards and 2 touchdowns. The Carolina Panthers defenses solve all issues for running back. Even Tyler Algier did really well. He had over 100 yards and a touchdown in this game too. Every running back does well against Carolina except for Zamir White because Zamir White is not good. But Bijan, I mean, he should still be considered a top 3 dynasty running back if anybody was concerned and didn't have him up there. I know I got questions last Friday if Bijan was still even the dynasty RB1. I think that he's still my dynasty RB1. Him and Breece Hall are still 1 and 2, but they're definitely part of a larger tier. But I'm not really concerned from a dynasty standpoint about Bijan Robinson. I'm not actively going out to buy him, but if you have him, there's no real reason to like panic sell him, especially after this. He just proved to you that he's still Bijan Robinson, and he's fantastic. And his schedule the rest of the way is pretty solid too. On the Panthers side of the ball, Jatavian Sanders, man, JT Sanders, 5 receptions for 49 yards, 7 targets, 18% target share. I feel like he's been going largely under the radar just because Chuba Hubbard is producing well. Deontay Johnson obviously is the top target in this team. But JT Sanders for the past 3 weeks now has gone from 2 targets to 5 targets to 7 targets. And over the past 2 weeks has held in that mid 70% snap count area as well. He was my tight end 2 in this 2024 class, even after the draft, even with Ben Sinnott being drafted by the Commanders in round 2. I still held firm with JT Sanders as my tight end 2. I think that he has an opportunity to grow into a very good fantasy tight end. He is not, he's accustomed to producing with other really good, players around him, just like he was at Texas. He still produced with Adonai Mitchell and Xavier Worthy there for multiple years. Bijan Robinson was there too. He's able to produce with other people. We saw that in college. So now I think he just needs to grow into his role in the NFL in this Panthers offense. And I think that he makes a very excellent stash. Again, another player that I wouldn't actively go out and trade for, like target him 1-for-1 in a deal, like send a third for JT Sanders. But how can you acquire him as a throw-in piece, as a, just kind of like as you're doing a 2-for-1 already, but can you make that a 3-for-1 or something like that if you're tearing down? Or how can you just add JT Sanders into a larger deal? That's how you go out and buy him. And he's a very, very good stash right now, I think, for the opportunity that he has in this offense as a potential second option in the team behind Deontay Johnson, and grow with that offense more down the road once Dave Canales gets a quarterback that he wants, and with Jonathan Brooks and everything. So, yeah, JT Sanders. Sunday night game, Bengals and the Giants. This whole game was really, really weird, just like the Giants game was last week too in week 5. Tyrone Tracy's good, but he's just a handcuff, I think, although I think he's becoming more than a handcuff with his performance. But I still think Devin Singletary can do everything that Tracy can do, and maybe even slightly better. So maybe at worst it's like a 50-50 split. Maybe he's now the Chase Brown to Singletary Zach Moss, which we're kind of seeing Chase Brown take over the backfield a little bit more and more. So I don't really want to deal with any of the running backs from the Bengals side of it. They're both fine. They're both fine to have, and both good if the other guy were to get hurt. Maybe that's what Tracy and Singletary end up becoming. Darius Slayton is good, but he's also just kind of like a handcuff, more or less. And Malik Neighbors at least looks like he's on pace to play this week against the Eagles. So that's just Jamar Chase and T. Higgins are fantastic. Joe Burrow is fantastic. Daniel Jones still producing decently for fantasy football. So I'm just kind of bypassing this game. It just happened. There's only like 24 points scored. And for the large majority of the game, there's only like 14. So it just was a weird game. But we know who the good players are in this offense, and both offenses, in Chase, Higgins, Malik Neighbors. Chase Brown might be taking over the backfield. We need to monitor that as we move forward. But yeah, that's basically it from the Sunday night game. Now we get to the Monday night football game. And of course, there's really nothing to talk about from the Monday night game. Breece Hall obviously looks fantastic. The Buffalo Bills are a good defense to fix things as well. Garrett Wilson produced well. Alan Lazard produced well. Ray Davis season. We love to see it, but nobody cares about that because all we care about is that both of these teams just traded for a wide receiver. The Buffalo Bills just acquired Amari Cooper. The Jets just acquired Davante Adams. So that is fantastic. So you guys just want to hear me talk about both these guys. And I'm going to tell you that I think both of these guys are sells. I think that you should be selling both of these guys. If you have Davante Adams, you have Amari Cooper, their values just gained. I don't basically artificially. I don't even know if that's like the right way to put it, but their values just gained a ton of value because of the perceived better offenses that they're going into. Not to say that I think that they won't, produce or that they're not in better situations. Both of them are absolutely in better situations. So their value should have risen. But I think that people are overvaluing how much they actually are going to produce. Adams might come in. He might just be the Alan Lazard replacement, which, mind you, Alan Lazard is the current wide receiver 18 in fantasy points per game. He is actually outproducing Davante Adams right now on a points per game basis for fantasy football. So Davante Adams might come in. He might just be a slightly better Alan Lazard. And I don't know if that's really worth paying a first round pick for. And if anybody's thinking that he's going to be any better than that, I would be going out and trying to see if you can upgrade off of Davante Adams to get up into the Rashee Rice range, the Garrett Wilson range. Can you buy low on Garrett Wilson using Davante Adams? Can you get up to a Jaden Reed, a Brian Thomas Jr.? How can you use him to upgrade and also buy back some age in Dynasty? Same thing with Amari Cooper. He's never really had a wide receiver one ceiling in his career. He's played with Dak Prescott before. He's played with a really good young Derek Carr, and he's done well with Joe Flacco at the end of last year, but he's never really had that consistent wide receiver one ceiling. Of course, on a weekly basis, he can explode. He had that 50 bomb last year, but on a weekly basis, and especially if he's coming in, learning a new offense, this team probably still wants to be a little bit more run first with James Cook coming back and healthy, with Ray Davis showing out. I just don't know if Amari Cooper has a top 12 fantasy ceiling for the remainder of the year. And also not to mention the fact that he himself is 30 years old. Last year, Stephon Diggs was the wide receiver 15 in fantasy points per game at 30 years old. I think Stephon Diggs is a better player than Amari Cooper. So I don't know if we can expect Amari to do better than Diggs in the same role based on what Diggs did last year. So I think you could, if I had either one of these two guys, I would be trying to see if I can upgrade off of both of them. What can I add to move up to that same range that I just mentioned of Jaden Reed, of Drake London, of Garrett Wilson, of DK Metcalf, of buy Rashee Rice, even still, buy Puka. Can you buy any of those guys and easily upgrade to any of them with the artificially inflated values of Davante Adams and Amari Cooper? And as a side note, I mentioned buying Garrett Wilson, but I'm also looking to buy Dalton Kincaid. I think that people are thinking that he's going to be hurt from this, which not to say that, obviously another target body coming in, taking away targets from Dalton Kincaid is probably not the greatest, but Kincaid did well last year with Stephon Diggs. I think that as long as this offense gets better, and especially if them buying Amari Cooper means that they want to pass more, I think that's a good thing for Dalton Kincaid. He's been fine from a fantasy perspective. He just hasn't really scored. That's been the issue for him, is that, earlier in the year, he didn't get a lot of volume because they just dominated games. They blew out the Miami Dolphins and everything. So he didn't really have like a full game's worth to really produce from a target standpoint because they stopped throwing at halftime. But over the past couple of weeks, he's been totally fine. But again, if this is a signal that Buffalo wants to pass more, then I think that that's still a good thing for Dalton Kincaid. So I'd be looking to buy him if anybody is concerned about Amari Cooper coming in. Khalil Shakir and Alan Lazard, I'm sorry to both of you, but they are the biggest losers from both of these deals. So that just kind of is what it is with both those guys. They were fun, but probably are going to drift back away into more or less nothingness as for right now, unless another injury pops up. But that's my at least takeaway from the Bills and Jets, the Monday night game, plus their additions of Adams and Amari. And yep, that is it. That is my sign that we are done with Dynasty lessons learned for week 6. So I appreciate everybody for hanging out, watching. If you got up to this point for 40 minutes, and once again, I am terrible at outros, so I'm just going to end the video. I appreciate everybody watching. We will catch you guys next week and on Friday, this Friday again at 12 p.m. Eastern time for the AMA stream. So till next time, guys, peace.